They were richer than nations, more powerful than governments. Their names once moved markets, decided wars, and shaped the future of millions. But today, most people have never heard of them. How did billionaires who ruled entire industries vanish from history? What destroyed empires that seemed untouchable? Was it greed, betrayal, war, technology, or a single mistake made too late? This is not a story about success. It's about power at its peak. And what happens when the world changes faster than wealth can adapt? Because history doesn't remember who had the most money, it remembers who survived. They once commanded wealth greater than nations. Their empires reshaped the world. But history has a way of erasing even the richest names. This is the story of billionaires who built empires, then lost everything to time. John D. Rockefeller did not just become rich, he redefined what wealth meant. At the height of his power, his company controlled nearly every drop of oil flowing through the United States. Governments feared him. Competitors vanished. Entire industries bent around his decisions. This was not just a business empire, it was an economic force powerful enough to shape a nation. But empires built on absolute control attract absolute resistance. As public outrage grew and political pressure mounted, the same system that allowed Rockefeller to dominate began to turn against him. Laws were written, power was challenged, and in a single historic ruling, the greatest monopoly the world had ever seen was dismantled. This is the story of how Rockefeller built an empire that seemed unstoppable, and how history proved that even the richest man who ever lived could not outrun change. Chapter 1. The Birth of a Titan. Before the empire, before the oil fields and boardrooms, there was John D. Rockefeller, a quiet, disciplined bookkeeper with an unusual obsession: control. Born into modest circumstances, Rockefeller learned early that money was not something to chase loudly, but something to manage precisely. While others took risks chasing quick profits, he focused on efficiency, patience, and structure. In the mid-19th century, oil was chaos. Prices collapsed overnight. Companies failed constantly. Most saw danger. Rockefeller saw opportunity. He entered the refining business not to gamble, but to organize. Every expense was tracked. Every waste eliminated. Every advantage quietly secured. Rockefeller believed competition was inefficient. Stability, he thought, came from consolidation. One by one, rivals were absorbed, outpriced, or pushed aside, not through spectacle, but through calculation. This philosophy gave birth to Standard Oil, a company built not on innovation alone, but on total operational dominance. By his early 40s, Rockefeller controlled an industry that powered the modern world. Oil lit homes, fueled factories, and moved economies, and he stood at the center of it all. This was the birth of a titan. Not through noise or rebellion, but through discipline, silence, and an unshakable belief that order was power. Chapter 2. Power without limits. By the time John D. Rockefeller reached the height of his influence, power no longer came from wealth alone, it came from structure. Through Standard Oil, Rockefeller controlled not just refineries, but pipelines, rail contracts, storage facilities, and pricing itself. Oil did not move without passing through his system. This level of control reshaped American capitalism. Competitors were no longer fighting each other. They were fighting inevitability. Standard Oil could lower prices until rivals collapsed, then raise them once the market was cleared. Railroads offered secret rebates. Suppliers fell in line. What appeared on paper as efficiency felt to the public like dominance without escape. Rockefeller never appeared in the spotlight. He rarely spoke publicly. He issued no threats, yet governors, bankers, and industrialists adjusted their decisions around him. His empire influenced legislation, trade routes, and the cost of daily life for millions. This was power without visibility, and therefore without immediate resistance. But absolute control creates its own pressure. Journalists began asking questions, reformers demanded limits. Politicians saw an enemy too large to ignore. The same reach that made Rockefeller untouchable now made him impossible to hide. At its peak, Standard Oil was not merely a company, it was a parallel authority, and history was beginning to decide whether any private empire should ever hold that much power. Chapter 3. The Peak of the Empire. At its peak, John D. Rockefeller stood atop the most powerful business empire the modern world had ever seen. Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of America's oil refining and distribution. This was not dominance, it was near total command. Entire regions depended on Rockefeller's infrastructure to function. The empire ran with mechanical precision. Prices were stabilized, supply was regulated. Profits flowed with certainty rather than risk. To supporters, Rockefeller had brought order to a chaotic industry. To critics, he had eliminated freedom itself. But from inside the system, the results were undeniable. Efficiency unmatched, wealth unprecedented, and influence without rival. Rockefeller himself had become almost mythic. Rarely seen, rarely heard, yet omnipresent. Markets reacted to his moves before they were announced. Industries aligned themselves around his decisions. His fortune surpassed that of entire governments, making him, by modern standards, the richest individual in history. Yet empires do not collapse at their weakest, they collapse at their strongest. The greater Standard Oil grew, the more visible its shadow became. Public anger hardened, legal scrutiny intensified. The idea that one man could control the energy supply of a nation began to feel dangerous. This was the summit. Absolute power, maximum reach, and no visible rival. But history had already begun to turn its gaze upward, toward the peak. Chapter 4. The Turning Point. The fall of John D. Rockefeller did not begin with failure, it began with fear. As Standard Oil tightened its grip on the American economy, the public mood shifted. What once looked like efficiency now felt like domination. Journalists exposed secret deals, reformers demanded action, and politicians, pressured by voters, searched for a way to break the empire's hold. In 1890, the United States passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, a law designed specifically to confront monopolies. At first, it seemed symbolic. Standard Oil continued to operate as before, but the idea was now in place. No private entity should control an entire industry. Years of investigations followed. Courtrooms replaced boardrooms, lawyers replaced executives. Rockefeller, once untouchable, found his empire trapped inside a legal framework designed to limit power. In 1911, the ruling arrived. The Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil to be dismantled into dozens of independent companies. Rockefeller kept his wealth. His influence, however, was fractured. Control, his greatest weapon, was gone. This was the turning point. Not a sudden collapse, but a historic decision that redefined the limits of capitalism and proved that even the greatest empires are ultimately subject to the rules of history. Chapter 5. Erased by time. When the empire ended, John D. Rockefeller did not disappear, but his dominance did. The breakup of Standard Oil scattered power across dozens of companies, each operating independently, each beyond his direct control. The system he built survived. His command over it did not. In the years that followed, Rockefeller retreated from public life. He lived quietly, focused on philanthropy, education, and medicine. His fortune continued to grow through the very companies born from his dismantled empire, but the age of singular control was over. The world moved on to new industries, new titans, and new forms of power. History remembers Standard Oil as a case study, a warning, a turning point in capitalism, But Rockefeller himself became something more distant, reduced to a name in textbooks, a symbol rather than a force. The man who once controlled the lifeblood of a nation faded into abstraction. This is how history erases power, not by destroying wealth, but by stripping relevance. Empires fall not only when they collapse, but when time renders them unnecessary. Rockefeller proved that money can build an empire powerful enough to reshape the world. History proved that no empire, no matter how vast, escapes being left behind. The story of John D. Rockefeller is not a story of poverty or personal ruin. It is something more unsettling. He died wealthy, respected, and influential. Yet the empire that once made him untouchable no longer existed in its original form. What he truly lost was not money, but absolute control. Rockefeller proved that discipline, strategy, and patience can build power on a scale the world has never seen before. He transformed chaos into order and turned a volatile resource into the backbone of modern industry. In doing so, he helped shape the economic system we still live under today. But he also revealed its limits. History does not punish success. It punishes permanence. The moment an empire grows so large that it overshadows society itself, resistance becomes inevitable. Laws are written, rules are enforced, structures are dismantled, not because wealth is evil, but because unchecked power is dangerous. The lesson is not that ambition is wrong or that wealth must be destroyed. The lesson is simpler and far more enduring. No individual, no company, and no empire can place itself above time, change, and collective will. Rockefeller mastered money, but history mastered Rockefeller, and that is the final truth behind every great empire that ever rose. Wealth can shape the world for a generation, but only adaptability, restraint, and legacy decide what survives beyond it. Because history doesn't erase empires out of anger. It erases them out of necessity.